From the Samueli Institute headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia, this is On Human Flourishing. I'm Dr. Wayne Jonas. Our current healthcare system has undergone many changes over the years, some because of legislative initiatives, while other changes are prompted by the need to focus more on prevention and healing. One of the lesser-known influences is that of military medical research. In a large survey completed by Samueli Institute, members of the military are utilizing complementary medical practices such as acupuncture, dietary supplements, and yoga at a much higher rate than their civilian counterparts. My guest today is Lieutenant General Eric Schoomaker, a retired Army doctor who currently serves as Professor of Military and Emergency Medicine and Vice Chair of the Department of Military and Emergency Medicine programs at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, our nation's military medical school. In addition to these achievements, General Schoomaker had a distinguished career in the military, serving for over 32 years, culminating as the 42nd Surgeon General of the United States Army and Commanding General of the U.S. Army Medical Command during our longest wars. We really appreciate you spending some time talking to us about not only integrative medicine and self-care, but also about, hopefully we'll get into a discussion about healthcare in general and how can medicine play a role in helping our country become more healthy, which it does I think in small ways now, but we'd like it to become bigger in that area. So maybe we could start with your work currently at the university, and especially some of your work in attempting to bring in so-called integrative practices, self-care practices, and why are those important? And why are you spending time doing this, and why is the university doing this?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here and to chat with you, Wayne. I'm really appreciated the time that you've given to improving the health and well-being of all of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, Coast Guardsmen, and their family through your career and through the work of this institute. I've continued to work coming to the Uniformed Services University, which is our only federal health university that's the mandate for which is to prepare physicians, graduate nursing students, graduate dentists, and a range of PhD and master's trained health professionals, largely in uniform, but as well some civilians who will serve the military family writ large. And I've enjoyed my relationship with the school before I came formally to the school, but I think as I got close to the end of my career, I realized that so much of what we benefit from in the generations that I served was due to the foresightedness of people who trained and educated, I think, a very solid cadre of uniformed and civilian professionals who were dedicated to keeping the force healthy and to care for it in the event of often unavoidable illness, injury, or combat wounds. And I've seen I've derived a lot of satisfaction from being a part of now that educational and research focused process that we have going on right now. And I think, to get back to your theme of today's discussion, I think that it is almost a blinding flash of the obvious that if we're going to make major inroads into the way that we look out for the health and well-being of the future, we need to educate and train people successfully in the present.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The whole issue of integrative medicine, people are still not quite sure what it is, why it's important. As you know, our institute published a survey last year showing that the service members use integrative or complementary practices, I should say, such as acupuncture, dietary supplements, mind-body yoga, this type of thing, at a higher rate than the average population does. And I know you've been instrumental in trying to introduce these things to the healthcare professionals into the medical school. I think doing the first course that was a required course in those areas in any medical school. Can you talk about why this is important to the military and where it might be going?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. We got a lot of attention for the fact that this was a required or mandatory workshop in integrative medicine. I like to tell people a lot of medical school is mandatory or required. There aren't a lot of things that are left optional in that setting. What we felt strongly about, and a number of us on the faculty who have taken the lead on this, and I'm proud to say I'm not alone in this effort. There's a dedicated core of uniformed and civilian faculty who many of whom spent a very long time studying individual modalities of the whole framework of integrative, of complementary and integrative practices. But it was for that reason that our patients and future patients are interested in it, are using it, and as the survey that you refer to highlighted, perhaps even it's more popular and it's used more frequently even than the general population. Now, I've often wondered why that is. I don't think we have any complete clarity on that. Many people jump to the conclusion that might be because they've abandoned more conventional approaches to complex illnesses or injuries. I think it's preliminary to conclude that. I take note of the fact that many of our service members are foreign-born. They come to this country often with experiences from their native lands, both Asian and subcontinent of India and other places, where they may have been exposed to this earlier in life and have brought that practice into their uniform career. We also have a large number of foreign-born immigrant spouses and family members, and then finally, many of our service members, myself included, in fact, it was one of the first ways we were introduced to some of these complementary practices, serve in foreign countries. I think your own experience in the Army was the same way. Right. So my wife's first exposure to, and this is not a violation of HIPAA, she talks quite freely about this, one of her first exposures to complementary practices was on our second tour in Germany when she took advantage of a German acupuncturist to help her with some chronic low back pain. So I think for all of those reasons, and maybe others that we haven't probed, the military population seems to be quite receptive to this. And as a consequence, I think it's really important that our students understand the context in which their own patients are getting care. If they themselves, even if they themselves don't practice along these lines, the fact that they need to have some knowledge and some familiarity with what patients are coming to them with and seeking advice about. I think they need to be aware of what might be effective and in a particular setting and for a particular problem. And they also need to be mindful of what things might not be helpful and may even, in fact, be injurious in the case of some food supplements and others dietary supplements that people might be taking. And so we conceived of this notion of putting a few days into the curriculum of our students dedicated to exposing them to these practices. And that's the final thing I would say about this experience, is that we wanted it to be experiential. We didn't want this to just be another death by PowerPoint lecture. We wanted it to be experiential so that students could understand what the patients were experiencing, and in some cases might even derive some interest or benefit for themselves from this. Yoga, guided imagery, mindfulness meditation, some practices, and we incorporated into that also the work of CHAMP in educating better about good nutrition. One of the things that we all know about medical educations traditionally is that they're woefully deficient in how much they're taught about nutrition and how to assess emerging commercial and other products that might be out there. And so we brought in the team from CHAMP to help us with that.
CHAMP is a center in the university
Right,
that focuses on performance and health, right?
Right. This Consortium for Health and Military Performance I referred to earlier is one of our centers, and in fact is led by one of the other senior faculty and a very successful investigator in the department, Dr. Patricia Doyster, and the chairman of the department, Colonel Dr. Fran O'Connor. So we made it an experiential workshop, specifically so that people could have hands-on exposure to it in enough length that they really got a sense of what was happening. And I was pleasantly surprised with how many students, in some cases, were already involved in a discipline of their own around something like Tai Chi or yoga or meditative practice. Probably shouldn't have been surprised. I think this has been introduced, into American society and even the education system quite a long time ago. But it was nice to see that some are continuing to derive a lot of benefit personally from that.
Right. The whole issue of self-care is something you've mentioned, and I think is key. Certainly integrative practices often have a component of that, but sometimes not, and there's many others. Could you talk a little bit about that? Dr. Fries from Stanford and many others have shown that a good 70% or perhaps more of the chronic illnesses that plague us are intimately connected to lifestyle, to food, nutrition, diet, stress, exercise, this type of thing. And those aren't things you generally get from your doctor. It's something you normally have to do at yourself. And in fact, a lot of doctors aren't very good at it. Their burnout rates and self-care is not very good in doctors. So, where do these areas fit? And is our healthcare education system need to emphasize these more?
Well, I think they do, and I'm impressed with those medical schools, nursing schools, and other health professional schools that have turned to first and foremost arming their students and future graduates with insights into their own self-care. I think that's a vital part of of building, of training, of educating a self-sustainable, successful health professional. Care of anybody else begins with care of self. We teach every leader in the military, and certainly in the military medical community, that your first and foremost responsibility is care for the people who care for others. And I would apply that as well to the individual practitioner. How can you care for others? How can you successfully be generous in spirit and caring in your approach if you feel personally uncared for and powerless to affect your own health and well-being? So I think there's a great deal to be derived from these programs that give important insights to future practitioners. We spend so much time focusing on the technical aspects of medical and nursing education, not nearly as much as we probably could on self-assessment and self-reflection and the skills that are required to transcend the many changes that occur in the technical platforms that we'll be exposed to and technical skills. I mean, think yourself and for me, how much of the context of which care is rendered has changed since we got out of school. But we are the same human beings that came out of that school, and so being able to sustain that individual, I think, is so important and so vital. And I think it carries with it then the insight that how can those that you care for be equally successful in building their own framework of flourishing if they can't care for themselves? One of the things I've really come to appreciate and want to know more about since becoming a physician, and certainly in the last decade of watching the nation struggle at home and abroad with the threats that the military helps to overcome, are all those determinants of one's health and well-being that don't lie within the realm of medical care as we traditionally conceive of it. There are so many social determinants and interpersonal determinants of one's sense of health and well-being and empowerment around what we can do that are not in the hands of someone else. And I think this is what I'm becoming more and more attuned to is how much we need to address our patients and populations that we want to avoid becoming patients. Quite frankly, I think we need to change the construct of how we think about what it is that we do. We often talk about patient-centered care, and I understand the importance of focusing on patients, but in many respects, what we're really looking for is person-centered care that deals with people outside the context of a medical illness or a surgical requirement or an injury or wound, especially given what you just outlined, Wayne, is the overwhelming burden of injury, illness, and detractors from well-being that derive from our own inability not to manage our own health through addictive behaviors, through risky behaviors, whether it's sexual or motor vehicles or the use of drugs and such.
Right. Those lie outside often. They're in the behavioral component. So you've taken it now from the individual self-care component. I'd call that small. You might call that small, and taking it where I wanted to go, which is really looking at the larger aspect. What does the system need to do that? I mean, I didn't learn how to deliver that. The systems that I learned and practiced in weren't structured in a way that would allow me to reach out into the life space and help facilitate the determinants of care or the lifestyle components that are aspect of that. I think certainly we don't pay very much to do that. How can the system deliver on this? Do we need to completely restructure the system to address this 70% or these areas of health creation?
Well, I think there is much to be said for the fundamental flaws that we see in the current business model that we have for what we think is sustaining health and promoting quality health care. Interesting, earlier this week I sat in on a lecture by one of my colleagues who's very, very experienced in the whole area of safety and patient safety and quality about the Institute of Medicine studies and reports over the last decade on the determinants of patient safety and what is happening every year, every week in this country in a very complex system of healthcare delivery in which the systems are fraying and failing to keep people safe. So much so that our patients are beginning to fear seeking care in hospitals and clinics because they've become aware of the fact that in excess of 100,000 people conservatively are injured in the course of trying to help them.
Wow.
And as I think it's been said very, very often that, if we get very concerned and have national investigations when even a single commercial airliner goes down, and yet every year we have the equivalent of many jumbo jets being hurt and even dying in our hospitals, and yet we don't have that sense of crisis that maybe should be addressed there. Well, when you look at the determinants of patient safety and what has been outlined are the essential features of a safe system of care, what you find, not unlike what we find in promoting health, that many of the fundamentals that we look for, effectiveness, avoidance of error, efficiencies, timeliness, very few of them are positively supported by the present system that we're in. let's take the example of pain management. We have so many ways of approaching pain in this country, whether it's surgical or drug use. Even some of the integrated practices, quite frankly, are the complementary practices, which have not been demonstrated to be as effective as we would like, that are being applied, in which we have no confidence that the outcome for the patient is improved upon. In fact, we have this new diagnostic category called chronic pain from failed back surgery.
Right.
A complication of the very things that we're applying to patients that are trying to help them.
Right.
So I think first and foremost, we really need to look at the system by which we deliver care, and more important, moving away from the threshold of injury and illness itself, look at how we promote health and ask the question, is the system designed for the outcomes that we want it to have? You know, the old adage that every system is designed for the outcomes it delivers. Well, we're all beginning to conclude that that's exactly what our system is doing for us.
Right.
So I feel, as you are implying, that we really do need to look very critically at how the system, the business model by which we deliver care, and more importantly, how we promote health, is working in this country, and make some fundamental changes, not as a form of revolution, but as an evolutionary process that involves all of the principal stakeholders, including those that are currently delivering care or promoting health, and all of the important stakeholders in that, which includes the business community and civic organizations and faith-based organizations, people who I think have historically not thought of themselves as being central in the process of health improvement and healthcare delivery, but in fact are, I think, essential if we're going to make a major inroads into this.
It always has seemed to me that core aspects of efficient system change is something the military has done, and certainly when it's needed to respond to its mission to get rid of the enemy, protect the country, etc. Certainly the military has led in the area of emergency care and surgical techniques and this type of thing, that gets adopted by the rest of the country. And over the last 10 years, they've been through the crucible. You've been at the forefront of that. You've had to go into large systems and make major changes around those areas. How can the military be a leader for the nation in these areas, in these new challenges that we've just talked about? Can they actually show the way, and then how can that be translated over into the civilian sector?
Well, clearly, I wouldn't have remained in uniform as long as I did if I didn't think that we are making some major contributions to the nation's health and well-being, not only through what we do for our individual soldiers and their families, but, and you'll have to forgive me for anybody listening in on this who is representing or whose heart is centered in another service. It's not that I'm ignorant of or overlook other services. That I was a soldier myself, so I tend to think of soldiers first. I was privileged to be a part of a workshop not too many years ago in the Boston area, in which some major leaders in health in the state of Massachusetts and nationally were brought together, but including the surgeons general from the services, Army, Navy, and Air Force, senior representatives from the Veterans Administration, and some other thought leaders and political leaders in health and healthcare. And at the beginning of the meeting, I was struck by the fact that one of our civilian colleagues stood up and said, we think we talk all the time about a health and healthcare system in America, but in fact it's not a system at all. And he referred to the healthcare blob. But you in the military, and maybe the VA as well, appear to have a system. What distinguishes what you do from what we do? And my response to that was, and I thought it was a really profound observation, is that we're privileged to have a very distinct mission. And our first mission is to keep people healthy. I mean, it was the first mission of the military at the inception of the Republic, was to keep the force healthy. That if you didn't have a healthy force when surrounded by endemic diseases and environmental stressors and the like, going back to the Revolutionary War and all wars since, you weren't going to be able to defend the country. And so every responsible commander, going back to George Washington, who inoculated his force against smallpox and who instituted field sanitation principles as one of his first rules, recognized that the military's first responsibility, and quite frankly the role of the military officer that you were and I was, is to keep the force healthy. Most people think about us as being principally there to take care of people once wounded or injured or ill in the course of their service, but they forget that it starts a lot more before that. It goes into how do you arm people with insights into what keeps them healthy, and quite frankly, as we've evolved, especially in the last decade of wars, that we've become more and more sophisticated about understanding how important, say, family health is and family well-being is to supporting the individual combatant or service member. We've become far more sophisticated about issues of nutrition and the role of exercise in a global sense, the importance of sleep, the importance of taking ownership of one's own health and well-being. And that was my response to them, is I think if we could come to the same conclusion as a nation, that the role of the health promotion and health sustaining and health care systems in this country were primarily to keep the people of this country healthy and productive and flourishing, I think it would begin a really important dialogue about then how do you change the models that deliver that.
Right, exactly. Well, let me bring it back small again, and I hope you realize now that I'm using that little tongue-in-cheek. I don't think the small and the big are actually that different. It is the small things that actually create the big things. I remember Admiral Zimble, the former president of the university, Uniformed Services University, who sat on our Samueli board for a while, the late Admiral Zimble. He used to say, this is one of the few systems, that is the military system, that actually sees the whole picture and has that kind of focused mission that requires that they rally all those points together. And just a few hours ago, I was sitting in the current dean's office at USIS, and he had two posters up, one showing the trauma over the last decade that has been the primary mission for dealing with from the wars, and then one showing the future. And the one in the future looked a lot more like the crisis that our healthcare system at large is facing, with rising costs, poorer health in general, higher mortality rates, higher morbidity rates. And he said, this is the challenge that we are faced with now, because this will be some of the biggest national threat to our country that we need to do. And so I see that he certainly seems, and I know you are, committed to using the military system and USIS specifically as the nation's military medical school to try to shine a light and show the way forward to solve what is not just a military problem, but really is a national problem.
I think we've all become quite concerned within the defense side of things about the suitability of the next generation for serving in uniform, and how that's getting to be a smaller and smaller population of the generations coming up, plagued by obesity and problems in both physical, emotional, and spiritual fitness. But I would say for the nation as a whole, as we demographically become inverted, as generations like yours and mine age, and we become more and more reliant on the young people who are going to be fit and able to sustain the nation economically, we ought to be just as alarmed about what's happening in the workforce as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the buy-in needs to come from the business community, the civic communities, anyone who has an interest in the long-term sustainability of the country. We can't depend upon or live with the hope that we're going to be fueled by, immigrant populations or, white rabbits being pulled out of the hat.
Right, exactly. Well, I appreciate you dialoguing with me about these important topics. I appreciate all you've contributed to the country and all that you continue to contribute in these areas. And I appreciate your participation in the Creating Wellbeing Leadership Group that we're going to go to in a little bit. It's trying to bring together public-private partnerships in these areas. So, again, thank you for your past and continued service in these areas.
Well, likewise, thanks for all the work that you've been doing and the lessons that you're teaching all of us, Wayne. You've been marvelous.
If the distinct mission of the fighting force is to keep service members healthy, the question our discussion now raises is, why can't that mindset be adopted by our nation and the civilian healthcare system as well? As members of the military prepare for battle, there must be consideration for the whole person in order to prepare for the stress, injury, and the harsh conditions of deployment. But I can't help wonder why the same consideration is not made for the civilian population. After all, many people in this country face similar challenges, especially those in poor communities, and all of us as we age. Integrative medical approaches such as acupuncture, tai chi, music, mind-body therapies, and nutrition and others have been gaining momentum in the healthcare system. While the average person may not need to prepare themselves for battle, wellness and preventative care are crucial to a flourishing and productive society.